Recording in progress.
Okay, progress finished. Okay, good morning and yeah.
Shall we start with prayers?
Yeah, before we generate correct motivation, then we do the prayers. So, because we're going to talk about the essence of emptiness, so to say, according to Nagarjuna's text, Fundamental Wisdom, and well, chapter 18, the most important chapter in the whole text. So, for that purpose, try to generate correct motivation and well, understanding emptiness for a particular purpose, because if you understand emptiness, then also compassion and loving kindness will increase. Yeah, so, and that's for a particular purpose, and well, for the purpose of eliminating the suffering of sentient beings, we need to generate compassion and we need to have the methods of wisdom. So, try to think in those lines. That is our responsibility to do something about countless sentient beings, and for that purpose we're here, and for that purpose we're going to study a little bit more about emptiness. Yeah, so generate motivation for yourself. And then as we're going to recite the prayers, think in front of yourself as Sakyamuni Buddha, surrounded by the masters of India and Tibet and the other Buddhist traditions, and in particular the lineage of wisdom and method here of Asanga and Nagarjuna, so to say, all the way up to His Holiness Dalai Lama, and surrounding yourself. Imagine countless sentient beings undergoing individual sufferings, and focus upon that. Think you have to lead them out of this situation, and for that purpose you're studying here. For that purpose you lead them in the prayer, and then recite the prayer. So think you lead them in the prayer all the way up to enlightenment. Yeah, you can have the prayers. Then we recite the prayers of Sakyamuni Buddha, the origin of the teaching, and the most essential teachings of the Prajnaparamita, Affliction of Wisdom Sutras, the Heart Sutra, and then the foundation of vocal qualities as being the motivation for us of the Lambrim, so to say, or give us the stages of path enlightenment. Yeah, take it into account, then recite the prayers together. To the founder, down to enter and destroy, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, full awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, the guardian over the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of God's human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the Lord's conqueror, subdue from the psychic plane, prostrating God's go for refuge. To the founder, down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, full awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, the guardian over the world, guide of human beings to attain, teacher of God's human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from the psychic plane, prostrating God's go for refuge. To the founder, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, the guardian over the world, supreme guide of human beings to attain, teacher of God's human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from the psychic plane, prostrating God's go for refuge. When you're supreme amongst humans, you were born in this earth, you played out in 7 strides, and then said, I'm supreme in this world. To you are wise and are prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Flame that blazes the 3 worlds, surrender of the best Lord to you prostrate. With supreme science, face like spotless moon, color like gold to you prostrate. Thus free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one to you prostrate. The same having great compassion, and founding having understanding, vast ocean, to you the one come to dustness I prostrate. Beauty that frees from attachment, the virtue that frees from the lower realms, the one path sublime pure reality, the Dharma that pacifies I prostrate. Those who are liberated and show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, were devoted to the moral precepts, to you a sublime community attending virtue are prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha. To all 3 have a devoted homage. To a worldly of respect, bound with bodies, as many realms and all aspects, with supreme faith they pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subduing my authority. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a reverberation, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, drop or a dew or a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditions as such. To this merits may all sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the full faults, and be delivered from sorrow, perturbed by the waves, aging, sickness, and death. I prostrated Arya Chipajam. Just I heard one time, the Bhagwan was dwelling in the Mars Bridges mountain. Rajgir together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration category of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avivisvara, where practiced profound affection and wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also empty in nature. Then, with the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avivisvara, how should any son of the lineage train who wish to practice activities of profound affection and wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avivisvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra, Shariputra, and son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wish to practice activities of profound affection and wisdom, should look upon it like this, correctly and repeating beyond those five aggregates also. Nation. Form is empty, emptiness is form, empty is not other than form, and form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristics, unproduced, unsustained, not without stain, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no touch, and no phenomenon. There is no element up to and including no mind-element and no mental consciousness. There is no ignorance, extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, no extinction, aging, and death. Similar, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and parts. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on eternal perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error to reach the end point of nirvana. And all the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifest complete awakening on surprise perfect reliance on perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, non-surprise mantra equal to unequal, the mantra that truly pacifies all suffering should be known as a truth since it's not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is declared, Sayata, Gata Gata Para Gata Para Samkata Bodhiso. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train found perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avivisvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice profound perfection of wisdom, just as we indicated, and even that gods rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avivisvara, and those surrounding there entirely, along with the words of gods, humans, and Sudras, overjoyed and highly praised. I prostrate to the gathering of the kings of the three chakras who abide of the holy ocean in space. By the power of clairvoyance and magic illumination, look at my for our child. Aka samadasasana samadhyamaka. Aka samadasasana samadhyamaka. Tayata gata gata para samgata buddhi. By the teachings of the three Sharam jewels possessing power of truth, may in and out hymns be transformed. May they be dispelled and may they be pacified. May all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified. May the hosts of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. And may we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. And may all enjoyments be accordance with the Dharma. And may there be auspicious and perfect happiness here, right now. Yeah, 93. The foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure Guru. Correctly devoting to him is the root of the path. By clearly seeing this and applying great effort, please bless me to enlightenment with great respect. Understanding the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once, is greatly meaningful, difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate in mind unceasingly, day and night takes its essence. This life is as permanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly the gates and death comes. After death, the shadow follows the body, the wheels of black and white come and follow. Finding firm and definite conviction in this, please bless me always to be careful, to abandon even the slightest negativities and accomplish all virtuous deeds. Seeking samsaric pleasures is a door to all suffering. They are uncertain, cannot be relied upon. Recognize these shortcomings, please bless me to generate a strong wish for the bliss of liberation. Led by the spiritual thoughts, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teaching is skipping prashimoksha vows. Please bless me to accomplish this essential practice. Just as I have fallen to receive samsara, so of all modern migratory beings. Please bless me to see this, train as supreme bodhicitta, and be the responsibility of free migratory beings. Even if I develop only bodhicitta, but not practice three types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment. With my clear recognition of this, Please bless me to practice the Bodhisattva vows with great energy. Once, justify distraction to wrong objects and correctly analyze the meaning of reality. Please bless me to generate quickly in my mind stream the unified part of calm abiding, especially inside. Having become a pure vessel by training in the general part, please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones, the supreme Vajraphika. At that time, the basis of accomplishing two attainments is keeping pure vows and samadhi. As I become firmly convinced of this, please bless me to protect these vows and pledges like my life. Then, having realized the importance of the two stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, great energy never giving up the four sections, is made to realize the teaching of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the Gurus who show the noble path and spiritual friends practice it by long lives. Please bless me to pacify completely all out in the hindrances. In all my lives, never separate from perfect Gurus, may enjoy the magnificent Dharma by completing qualities, stages, and paths. May I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. So, Janjo Bado Dani Yazoji, Dagi Chizu Gibbons, Dola Benji Sangye Doba Jo Sangye Judan Zuni. Janjo Bado Dani Yazoji, Dagi Chizu Gibbons, Dola Benji Sangye Doba Jo Sangye Judan Zuni. Janjo Bado Dani Yazoji, Dagi Chizu Gibbons, Dola Benji Sangye Doba Jo. Shutun to Gangi to Zenizawe, Tabatan Jabamacher, Tamba Chuni, Tunsaba, Kotan, De La Chats. So maybe start with one quotation of an old text by Nagarjuna, and well, a text was called the Janjup Semdrel, or the commentary on Bodhicitta. As we know, Nagarjuna wrote texts on philosophy, like the six texts on logic, proving emptiness. And Nagarjuna wrote a kind of praises, praise of the Vajra mind, or praise of Dhammadhatu. And Nagarjuna also wrote a collection of works with more practical advice, like we have the letter for a friend, for example, and also the commentary on Bodhicitta, a very interesting text, very Lamrim style kind of text. And there, Adi Nagarjuna says, when this emptiness has been explained, so if that's meditated upon by the yogis, then no doubt in the yogis there will arise a mind that wishes to work for the welfare of others. It's very interesting, because if you understand emptiness well, then it has two aspects, right? Emptiness will counteract a grasping at a concrete I am mine. Right? So like this self-deceptive thought or self-identity, as we call it in modern terms, in more kind of scientific terms, so to say. So that means that if you understand emptiness well, you will see that this self-deceptive thought is actually really deceptive. It's not really correct forms of consciousness. And also you will see that this self-identity, or grasping at a concrete I am mine, actually that self doesn't really exist. So if you understand that well, then automatically you won't think too much about yourself. As we know, self-cherishing attitude being the main cause of our problems in life, if you understand emptiness, then the power of this self-cherishing attitude becomes less, because this concrete grasping or grasping at a concrete I and mine becomes less, right? So, and you can see that people who contemplate emptiness, they're much more, I mean, there's not that many around, of course, but if you just do a search among scientists and you see scientists who are in the field of quantum mechanics or in other fields of science, and they look into the world of interdependence, then the majority of those scientists, they seem to be a much more relaxed attitude and much more open and to others. For example, David Bohm was an incredible example of that. Yeah, when he said there is no self as such. Yeah, it's just a show, a very convincing show, and that's why people take it as an apparent reality. But that self doesn't really exist. And he was so relaxed personality as a scientist, and probably that's, and not only, and he was real hardcore, kind of hardcore in the sense, he proved his hypothesis of wholeness by the power of quantum mechanics and by the power of equations. It's very interesting. So he came to this understanding of interconnectedness, and that brought him to be more open and more relaxed. And you can see that in his presentations. And that's also one of the reasons probably that he is so open, and he had these conversations with Krishnamurti, and His Holiness took him as his science guru, as you know. Yeah? So that brings an impact, not only on the individual, but also in dialogues. It's very interesting to see. Yeah? So that means that if you have a little bit of understanding that things lack inherent existence, and that things are in the nature of interdependence, then by itself, life becomes more relaxed. And as His Holiness says, that if you contemplate emptiness, it gives you so much freedom, because you don't grasp at things anymore. If you don't grasp at things inherently anymore, then the destructive emotions become less, right? So that's exactly what's happening. As His Holiness says, if you contemplate emptiness, like say 16 times a day, then it looks like afflictions don't arise. So that's very interesting. And so emptiness on many levels brings great benefit. Yeah, here according to this quotation, in order to generate compassion brings great benefit. Also, Chandrakirti in his works supplement to the middle way also indicated that a mind that realizes emptiness, yeah, that generates compassion, is much more sophisticated. And why is that? Because it understands why beings are suffering, and also understands how to get out of it, or how to lead them out of it, by having understood ignorance as well as emptiness. Yeah. So that's why emptiness is extremely important. And yeah, that's why I was very happy that Shantideva Center want to do something with Nagarjuna, and well, the fundamental wisdom text. Yeah, so it's very important. Yeah, emptiness in many levels, even in the Lamrim, on the small scope. You know, if you don't want to be born in low state of existence, you have to have practice morality. And morality becomes pure if you understand law of cause and effect. Because if you understand law of cause and effect, then automatically you will abide in morality. Because you see there's nothing else. There's no concrete I that makes a decision, right? So it's kind of, if you really understand emptiness well, your faith in law of cause and effect should increase. Yeah, and if faith in law of cause and effect increases, then morality comes automatically. I don't know if you listened to that interview, podcast of Wember Roger's interview on Casa Nagarjuna Center in Madrid. Yeah, towards the end, there's one question when he asked Lama Zopa Rinpoche, maybe Rinpoche should relax sometimes. Many years ago, I said, and Rinpoche said, why? And, or do something else, right? And then, or should take a break. That was actually the question. And then Rinpoche said, why? What? Do what? and then the question came up of how to relax. And then Roger asked Rinpoche, what does it mean to relax? And then Rinpoche said, to abide in morality. It's very interesting. Because if you abide in morality, then you abide in law of cause and effect. And there is no concrete inherent existence separate from cause and effect. So if you abide in morality, then things are at peace because you create the right causes in the future. You don't have to worry. So that's all has to do with understanding emptiness. The more you understand emptiness, the more you understand law of cause and effect. And that's exactly true in quantum mechanics. That people see that it's a process. It's kind of, nothing exists from its own side. And that's why you see that people like David Bohm and Carlo Rovelli in the worlds of quantum mechanics, who also study a little bit of philosophy, you can see their minds are very interested in law of cause and effect and responsibility and environmental issues, and it comes to mind because they see the correlation, you see. So that's why if you understand emptiness, then morality becomes pure. So for the small scope, straight away, that's a great benefit. Yeah. Then if you understand emptiness well, then of course you will be able to eliminate samsaric suffering, the afflictions together with the seeds, you know, because the root is in ignorance, so that can be eliminated. Yeah. And then, of course, if you want to achieve the state of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, you need to realize emptiness to eliminate obscurations to omniscience. And then also compassion will become stronger the more you understand emptiness, because you see the cause of sentient beings suffering, one aspect, being ignorance, and you see it's possible to eliminate them. And if you understand emptiness, the self-cherishing attitude becomes less strong, because the root of the self-cherishing attitude becomes less strong, meaning this grasping and I am mine. When the grasping and I am mine becomes less strong, then the self-cherishing attitude also becomes less. So that's, yeah, many benefits, so to say, from the point of view of emptiness. Yeah. But yeah, we're not only going to talk about emptiness, we're going to talk about the text. So chapter 18 of this text by Nagarjuna. So chapter 18 is actually the essence of all the texts by Nagarjuna written on emptiness. So it's a very profound chapter. That means that chapter 18 summarizes what comes before and summarizes what comes after. Yeah, in the whole text of the fundamental wisdom. Yeah, so chapter 18 is also the root of all our teachings on emptiness. Of course, the root is the Buddha's teachings of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, but it's all clarified by Nagarjuna and summarized in chapter 18. So whatever you study, if you study Lamrim, Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition of the Lamrim, or more shorter condensed forms of Lamrim, or whatever philosophy on emptiness you study, it's all rooted in chapter 18. So that means that it's a very, very important and very essential chapter. Yeah, in the monastic tradition of Nalanda, as we have in Tibetan system, then the 4 years of emptiness studies, right? Yeah. As you know, is based on Chandrakirti's entering to the middle way, mainly. And chapter 6 of that text actually explains, mainly emptiness, and this all has to do with chapter 18. Yeah. And also Lama Tsongkhapa, as we know, when he realized emptiness for the first time, after having engaged in extensive studies, serious retreats, purifying negative deeds, accumulation of merit, seeing the Lama non-dual with the deity, making strong requests, studying the great text, he realized emptiness based on chapter 18. And so that's quite an essential, from many angles you can see, it's a very, very profound chapter. So we only have about 2 hours and almost half an hour already gone. So yeah, this we don't have enough time to explain it in great detail, but we go over a few important points. Yeah. So that means that in chapter 18, it talks about, basically, mainly it talks about the sevenfold reasoning of Chandrakirti. Yeah, so the sevenfold reasoning of Chandrakirti actually comes from the sutra. There's also one sutra which actually summarizes the 7 points. It's not that Chandrakirti made those 7 points himself. Okay? And also in this chapter 18, those 7 points, they come up. Yeah, so Chandrakirti based his sevenfold reasoning on Nagarjuna, and Nagarjuna based it on the sutras. Yeah, and Chandrakirti also actually on both. Yeah. So yeah, so that's basically the main thing to be understood today is basically those sevenfold reasoning of Chandrakirti. So what does that mean, the sevenfold reasoning? So that means that there is an I that appears in a particular way when we get angry, or strong desire, or whatever destructive emotion that comes up. There is what we call ignorance being the root. Yeah, we always talk about ignorance being the root of samsara, ignorance being the root of all our problems, you know. So what is this ignorance? First of all, it has to be analyzed before engaging in the sevenfold reasoning. So then you have to check, how does the I appear? Yeah, so it appears in a very inherent, independent, all by itself, aspect. Yeah, so when you get angry or when a person criticizes you, there's a very strong I that you want to protect, or you think, I'm not like this. Yeah, so what is this I? So this I has to be recognized, otherwise emptiness will not really come to mind. Yeah, so we first have to recognize the object of refutation, as it's been called, right? The object to be refuted. Yeah, so that is a very important aspect. So Lama Tsongkhapa says in all his works that that's the main emphasis. If you got that picture right, then the rest is just power reasoning, and there you go, you get it. Yeah, it sounds simple, but you need a lot of merit and you need a lot of purification to recognize this object, and not only to recognize it, but to isolate it in a sense that put it separate, let it appear separate from emotions. Yeah, when we get angry or strong desire arises, or when somebody criticizes you, there's a whole cocktail of different emotions. So we shouldn't, when we remember a situation like that, we shouldn't engage or get involved in those emotions. We should just merely observe, how does the I arise? That's the main important thing. Then you habituate yourself to that. Yeah. So then mostly it appears very concrete from its own side, somewhere mixed with body and mind, right? It is not very clear, but in the sense, something solid appears. Yeah. Because as soon as you start to look for it, then there's a danger it disappears. So that means we have to keep it from the corner of the mind, as Babonga Rinpoche explains and many other masters. If you talk with a person on the road, you can look at the road as well as being connected in a conversation. Or in modern times, you look at your map where you go in the city, and then you look around as well, right? So we can do those two things. Yeah. Yeah, once I saw a person walk with two phones. You sometimes see that, right? Maybe for office and for private and still looking at the road. Yeah, so that's possible. So that means that for one corner of the mind, we have to analyze, how does the I appear? When anger arises, when it touches. So you just recall an event in your daily life and you check how it appears. Or when you come close to death. So you can use many examples. When you almost fall off a building, or if you have experienced an accident and you almost died, or drowned in the ocean, something like that, it can be quite helpful. Yeah. So if not, then you can imagine. Yes, you can use many angles. So if you're in the middle of the ocean and you fall off a boat, and then the boat goes away and you're stuck all by yourself in the middle of the ocean. So you're gonna die out of exhaustion for sure. Yeah. So then this I comes up. And so if you really imagine, or in New York, you have very tall buildings, right? So imagine you're on the building and somebody pushes you, and there you go. Yeah, so that means that, or in a free fall and the parachute doesn't go open, then you can imagine there's a very strong grasping and I. So the fear has to be separated. The fear is not of interest. What is of interest at that time is how the I appears. Also, when you get criticized, the anger is not of interest. The anger we don't look upon. We only look how the I appears. And then you start analyzing. Yeah? So with the sevenfold reasoning of Chandrakirti. Yeah. So to give a summary of that, that means that the first two aspects, which is related with the first verse and a few other verses in the text we're going to explain, that first reasoning is one and different. So one with or different from. That means that whatever exists, is either one or different from something. Yeah, so that means that if you see this mic, the very fluffy mic, that everything that exists is one or different. One with a mic, like the mic itself, is one with a mic, right? But the table is different from the mic. Yeah, so everything that exists is either one or different. There's no other possibility. Yeah, that's logical reasoning, and that's proved to be the case. Everything that exists is either one with the body of Tenzin Namdak or different from the body of Tenzin Namdak. Everything that exists is either one with the mind of Tenzin Namdak or different from the mind of Tenzin Namdak. So my own body, Tenzin Namdak's body, is one with Tenzin Namdak's body, right? Yeah, but the table is different. You see? So everything that exists has only those two possibilities. There's no other possibility. That's the first reasoning we have to come down. So here we use the reasoning of, based on epistemology, right? So in science, we use the language of mathematics and equations in physics, for example. And in these forms of philosophy, we use the language of epistemology. Yeah, so, and I studied a little bit of mathematics and statistics in my studies of hydrology. And then went into this system of epistemology. Is a complete different system, but it's very profound. And so profound that I think 2-3 weeks ago, I had a conversation with Carlo Rovelli for our next dialogue coming up. So he talks. And Carlo Rovelli, we talked about the 3 levels of interdependence according to Nagarjuna. Yeah, and then in the end of the conversation, Carlo said, I can completely agree with this. It completely fits within the findings of quantum mechanics. It's very interesting. Yeah, so that means we use the aspects of epistemology, but eventually we come to similar conclusions as we have with equations in mathematics, in fields of quantum mechanics, for example. It's very interesting. So that means that either it is one or different from. One with or different from. That's the first reasoning we have to understand. Yeah. So that's 1 and 2. Among the 7-fold reasoning of Chandrakirti, that's the first one and the second one. Then the third and the fourth reasoning of Chandrakirti talks about dependence. Yeah, so the support and the supported, so to say. That means the self, how it appears, very concrete, right? So it looks to be inherent, existing from its own side. Yeah? So that is not possible if there is a dependence between body and mind, and whatever depends or relates with body and mind. So that means that nothing can exist inherently and still have a dependence, because if things exist inherently, there's no correlation possible, right? There's no relation possible. If things exist all from their own side, there's no possibility of related with anything else than itself. So that means that the third and fourth reasoning of like how dependents are, that means that things cannot depend inherently on each other. My body and my mind, they interconnected. Yeah, cause and effect relationships are there, other forms of dependence are there. So that means that the body and the mind don't exist as two separate inherent entities. Yeah, so there is the dependence. Yeah, so there's dependence of self and the aggregates, as we say, or the self and body and mind. Yeah, that's what we talk about here. So if the self exists inherently, there cannot, the self, in the inherent self, cannot depend upon body and mind, right? And the body and mind cannot depend upon an inherent self. You see that? So if there's a self that appears when we get angry, or, in these cases we just described, if that self appears very inherent from its own side. But within the dependence of body and mind, it cannot exist that way. Yeah, that's how we come to reason 3 and 4. Yeah, the reason of dependence of the self depending on the aggregates, and the aggregates depending on the self. Yeah, so that's two-way traffic. Yeah. So then reason number 5 talks about then self, mean to that the self doesn't really, if the self exists inherently, it cannot really possess the aggregates, yeah, or be the possessor, and the aggregates being, possessed. Yeah? So that's not possible, because there should also be a correlation. Yeah? So that means that also that reason that reason actually helps us to see there cannot exist an inherent self. Yeah, so the first reason if we have a self that, you know, that appears when you check how it appears, it's very important. Yeah? So if you check how it appears in an inherent, independent, from its own side existing way, how dare this person say this to me? I'm not like this. Or I need this, I need that. I know a lot of things when I was very young, and I was a very annoying kind of youngster. And then I needed some particular food a particular day. And I was like, I need this, I need that. So then a very strong I arises. Yeah, you can see that in youngsters, you can see that in elder people, you can see that in the animal realm. There's all this grasping to a very concrete I that wants to be protected, or you want to protect. Yeah, but does that I actually exist the way it appears? That's the question. Because that I causes us to suffer in the sense we make things very concrete. And we make a distinction between us and them. And that's also on society level and on a global level causes a problem. And that's also what David Bohm came to the conclusion. Because of the self-identity, you know, we need power, we need security, we need, you know, things for ourselves or for our society. And we don't think about others. And that causes a lot of problems, he says, on a global level. And that's exactly what the Buddha talked about, right? Yeah. There's a lot of research being done also with you know, self-cherishing attitude and self-centeredness being cause for problems, yeah, on the individual level as well as in society. Yeah, by Daniel Brown, for example, from Harvard Medical School. Very interesting research being done. Yeah. So anyway, so that means that this I that appears is not one with or different from the body. You can actually, if you look where is this I? If it's one with the body, then then the I should have many parts, because the body has many parts, right? But the I, we look here, how does it appear? And does it exist exactly the way it appears? Because the way it appears is the problem, you see? The way the I appears, we think that's reality, or as David Bohm calls it, we take it as an apparent reality. Yeah? So how the I appears, we think that's reality. But whatever appears to our mind is not reality. And we know that from dream consciousness or other forms of states of mind, that we think it's true, but actually it's not. Yeah? So that means that if you examine where is this I, you know, then you check if it exists, as we just said, it should either be one with or different from the body. Yeah, so you check if it's one with the body, whatever is one with the body has many parts, legs, arms, you know, bones, organs, skin, muscles, etc., etc. So if you look, this I appears very concrete, so it cannot, if it exists one with the body, it should have many aspects or many parts, but it actually doesn't appear like that. So it cannot be one with the body. Yeah? And then you think, oh, then maybe it's separate from the body, like completely inherently separate, like a cat and a dog. And that's also not the case, because we say my leg, my arm. There seems to be a correlation. But the way it appears like independent. Yeah? So this ignorance appears in that way. So you check, and then also you cannot see it separate, or you put your body aside, visualize, or you chop. You visualize chopping parts of your body, and then put it aside, and does the I still arise like that? It's very interesting. Yeah? So you cannot really find it within the body and separate from the body. So that's kind of, it's not one with or different from the body. Yeah, and then the next level is kind of, okay, then maybe it's the mind. Then you see your mind also have, you know, we have 5 sensory perceptions, we have mental consciousness, we have different moments of mind, more subtler and more coarser forms of mind. So in that aspect, this I appears concrete to be one. If it's one with your consciousness, it also should have these many aspects. Yeah, but it doesn't appear as many, it appears as one. So it cannot be one with the mind. And then you think, oh, maybe then it's separate from the mind. And then you come actually to the conclusion that it's not inherently separate, because we say my feeling, my thought. Yeah, so it's not like a cat and dog, completely different. Yeah, so the one and different reasoning is one of the main reasons being examined in this particular chapter. Yeah. Then I said that that's the first and second of the sevenfold reason. Third and fourth is this dependence, right? That there is a dependence between the self and the aggregates in both ways. Yeah, the self depends on the aggregates and the aggregates depend on the self. So if there's an inherent from its own side existing self, that is not possible. Yeah? Because inherent means without dependence, right? It appears without dependence. It appears all by itself. So in this logic of dependence, it cannot exist. And then number 5 is to possess the aggregates. Yeah? That the self doesn't really possess the aggregate in an inherent way, because there's no correlation. There's no way you can possess something if you're completely separate from that. So that's 5, and then 6 and 7 are more, rough interpretation that it's not the mere collection. The mere collection of Tenzin Namdak's body is not the self, or the shape, so to say. Yeah? So that means number 7 is the shape. The shape is not really Tenzin Namdak, because it's also mind is there, right? So the mere collection of the body and mind is not Tenzin Namdak, and the shape of the body of Tenzin Namdak is not Tenzin Namdak. So you cannot really find it among those points. So that's just a summary of the sevenfold reason. Yeah, so maybe go to the text. Yeah, so in the text, the first verse, it says, if the self were the aggregates, it would have arisen and ceasing as properties. So that means if the self is one with the body and mind, then it should have the same properties, like decay and change. But the I arises very concrete from its own side, without dependence. And so we can see here, one with, if it's one with the body and mind, it should have the same properties as the body and mind, meaning momentary changing. But the I doesn't appear as a momentary changing aspect. It appears to be independent all by itself. And so that means that if the self were the aggregates, it would have, arising and ceasing, coming and going. And when the body dies, the self should die as well. And in the continuity of consciousness proves us that the continuity remains, right? The body we leave behind, but the continuity remains. So that means that arising and ceasing are not really properties of how the I appears, that particular self. Yeah, so with the first 2 lines, we can see it's not one with the aggregates. Yeah, and we just talked about the aggregates have many parts. If the self is one with the aggregates, then it should have many parts, but it appears to be just one. Right? So the thing is here very clearly, we have to see how does it appear, and the way it appears causes the problems. So we have to analyze if it exists the way it appears. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Yeah. Yeah. So then the third and the fourth line of that verse, it says, if it were different from the aggregates, yes, we just saw it, then it would have the characteristics. It would not have the characteristics of the aggregates, like a dog and a cat, be completely separated. And that's not the case, because if I say my body, my arm, my leg, my thought, my feeling, so it's not inherently separate. Yeah, so that means there's a correlation there. Yeah. So that's in verse 4. In the first verse, it talks about 2 aspects of one and different. Yeah. Then in verse number 2, it talks about if there were no self, where would the self possessions be? So here, in verse number 2, it talks about the view of the transitory collection. As we know, among all root afflictions, if you study mind and mental factors, we have 51 mental factors, as you know, and among the 51, there is the mental factor, the view of the transitory collection, which is among the 6 root afflictions, which is kind of more or less the main important mental factor to be understood, because the view of the transitory collection is actually the root of samsara in one way, because there's 2 aspects. It has the aspect of the self of a person as well as the self of phenomena. The view of the transitory collection is very important to be understood. So what is this view of the transitory collection? It's a view, meaning it's a kind of way of coming to a conclusion. That's a kind of a view that thinks that that focuses upon the transitory collection, body and mind. So collection of body and mind, and transitory meaning momentary changing. Yeah, body and mind, momentary changes. That's why we say transitory. And it's a collection of many aspects, so we say collection. So that's why we call it the view of the transitory collection. So that means it focuses upon body and mind and sees, or like to, or see, or basically apprehends, that's technically what we say, it apprehends an inherent I and mine. So it focuses upon body and mind, and it apprehends or holds an I and mine to exist inherently. That's the view of the transitory collection. So I is referring to the self of a person. Mine is referring to the self of phenomena in relation with the person. Yeah, because we say, I need this, or my computer. So when we say my computer, or my laptop, or my phone, or my this, my that, yeah. So there's an I which is related with the concrete I as the person, and that is related with the possessive aspect. Yeah, so it is a phenomena other than the person. So that's kind of what we say here when it says in verse number 2, if there were no self, meaning the self of a person. If there was no self, or you see the self doesn't exist the way it appears, then also the question is, there is also no grasping at objects. Yeah, so if you cut down the grasping at an inherent self, you cut down the grasping at objects. Yeah, so that means what this Holiness says, if you contemplate emptiness 16 times a day, it looks like afflictions don't arise. Why? Because you don't grasp at objects. When we get angry, we see the person we get angry with or the situation as completely existing from its own side, and we want to be separated from it. Yeah, and with attachment is the opposite. We like to be with the object, and we see it as very concrete out there, without dependence on the mind. But of course, it's all mentally created, right? Yeah. So there is this dependence. Yeah. So here, where there's no self, yeah, so means the self of the person, where would the self's possessions be? Yeah. On the pacification, here talks about, yeah, the pacification of the self and what belongs to it. Yeah, so that means if you pacify, the self-cherishing attitude, if you pacify the view of the transitory collection, yeah, if you understand the view of the transitory collection and you're able to counteract that or eliminate that, then it says one is freed from grasping onto an I and mine. And so I and mine refers to the view of the transitory collection. Yeah, so the view of the transitory collection is a root affliction that sees, by focusing upon body and mind, apprehends an I and mine to exist inherently. So that means if you understand there is no concrete self, then also there's no grasping at the self. If you understand there's no concrete mind or possessive aspects, then we also not grasp at possessive aspects. Yeah. That's in verse number 2. In verse number 3, it elaborates that a little bit more on that in the last 2 lines, where it says, one who does not grasp onto an I and mine. So a yogi who stops self-grasping, or a yogi who stops the apprehension of an I and mine to exist inherently. Yeah, so yogi would understand emptiness, basically. That's what it talks about. Yeah. That one does not exist. So that means also that yogi, he or she, right, also is empty of inherent existence. Yeah, so it's very interesting. We talk about ultimate nature of reality. Yeah. So even emptiness is empty of inherent existence. Even the Buddha is empty of inherent existence. When I talked with Carlo Rovelli, he found it very interesting. He said, that's the first philosopher I see who is beyond any form of an extreme. It's a very interesting comment he made. So Carlo Rovelli, as you know, is quite well known in the fields of quantum mechanics and wrote very popular international bestsellers. And he also studied quite some philosophy. But he said most of the philosophers, they always hold on to something ultimate, to exist by itself. But he said Nagarjuna is beyond that. He said Nagarjuna even says the Buddha is empty of inherent existence. emptiness itself is empty of inherent existence. So here also is very interesting to see, and that's the ultimate nature of reality, right? Because all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, even emptiness itself. So that's why we call it kind of an ultimate. Every phenomenon you can think of has this aspect of this ultimate nature of being empty of inherent existence. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So here also says the yogi is also empty of inherent existence. Yeah. Then one who views non-grasping. Yeah, so that means the yogi, you know, basically, generally speaking, the yogi realizes emptiness, right? Yeah. But if you view the yogi to exist inherently, that's one interpretation. There's many interpretations in different verses, but here one interpretation, Tsongkhapa, is said, if you view the yogi as inherent, yeah, who apprehends non-grasping onto I am mine, yeah, because that yogi realizes emptiness. But if you think the yogi exists inherently, then you do not perceive reality, because also the yogi is empty of inherent existence. There's one interpretation. Other interpretation of verse number 3 is, you can say that if you don't recognize the object of refutation, you will never be able to realize emptiness. Yeah, that means the one who views non-grasping onto I am mine, right? But views it in a way that the person is not capable of understanding the object of refutation, what is actually to be refuted, or sometimes we translate it as object of negation, right? What has to be negated. So in Tibetan, we have a term called kakcha. Kakcha has many different kind of meanings depending on the context. Yeah, so sometimes kakcha refers to something to be abandoned, something to be stopped, yeah, something that interferes. Yeah, so kakcha has many meanings. So in this context, some translators, they say object of refutation, that would has to be refuted. Some say object of negation, because emptiness is a negation, right? Emptiness is called a non-affirming negation, so they say, or non-affirming negative. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, that's just terminology, but here, if you don't recognize this object of refutation, you will never get it. Because if you don't know what the I is that has to be refuted, you might refute the wrong thing. And then people think, oh, there's nothing at all. There's no body, there's no mind. Then that's called nihilism, right? That's kind of misunderstanding of reality. Yeah, so we have to understand what has to be negated. Yeah. One I am mine. Yeah. So that's in verse number 3. It talks about what has to be negated. And it's true. If you want to find a thief, then you have to know how the thief looks like. Yeah. Otherwise, you never be able to pinpoint down the thief. Yeah. So that means you might shoot the wrong person if you don't recognize the target, right? So it's a bit a kind of not very comfortable example. But if you want to, have an object or a target, if you don't know the target, you don't know where to shoot. So here the target is this I, and not just this I, but an I that appears inherent, without dependence. And because of that, we think it exists, and because of that, anger arises, attachment, jealousy, pride, anxiety, fear, low self-esteem, depression is very, very similar. It's all rooted in this ignorance. Yeah? So when His Holiness met with the psychiatrist and one patient, and she was depressed, and then His Holiness says, "Why?" His Holiness sometimes quite direct. Yeah, in the West, we will say, "Oh, sorry to hear that. Yeah, please sit down," and But His Holiness is like straight on, and for some people, it's too much. But it's on the long term, it's more benefit. And then someone says, "Okay, who's depressed?" And say, "I am depressed." And where is this I? It's here. Yeah. And so he said, "Okay, move it from the left to the right for 1 centimeter." And then the lady says, "It's not there." And then she laughed, right? So that's a very interesting statement, because that means there's this concrete I that appears, right? And we think it exists the way it appears, and that's why we get into trouble. Because that's why we think, mine. And that's why we get angry, that's why we get attachment, that's why we get low self-esteem, jealousy, pride, depression, anxiety, fear. All those things are rooted in this I. But then if you see it doesn't exist the way it appears, then it relaxes. Yeah, it's a very interesting example, because if you understand it a little bit, you can see the benefits. You know, one of my friends here in Jamyang, she told me once that she had a few weekends, you know, on emptiness and the faults of self-cherishing attitudes. He said was much more beneficial than years of psychotherapy. It's a very interesting statement. You know? And it's probably true, although an average person in the West, they won't, what we talk about here, they think we completely lost it, or we're completely cuckoo or crazy. Yeah. Because an average person on the street, when you talk about emptiness in this way, everybody thinks there's an I. Because since beginner's lifetime, we have this habituation. So it's very difficult to think about the things we talk about here. So that's why you're very fortunate. Yeah, and also you didn't fall asleep yet, so that's good. Because mostly you talk about emptiness, people walk away or fall asleep, because you need a certain amount of merit to attend teachings or on instructions on emptiness, to contemplate it. Yeah, so it's quite fortunate situation. You know, as Aryadeva says in his 400 verses, he says that most people, they lack merit, so they don't even doubt. They don't even think about emptiness. Right? But those who have merit, they're able to doubt it. Does the I exist the way it appears or not? Maybe it doesn't exist the way it appears. So that kind of doubt, with the technical doubt tending towards the factual, doubt that goes towards reality, is a very constructive form of doubt. So that doubt shakes samsara. That's what Aryadeva says. So if you think there's an I that appears, does it exist the way it appears or not? Maybe not. That actually is our starting point of stopping samsara, right? To get that doubt, you need a lot of merit, as Aryadeva says. So it's very fortunate to have, because most people, they just think we completely crazy, and I exist and I'm there, and the whole, Western kind of culture is boosting up the ego, right? It's true, commercials are, you can do it, you this, you that. So then when you talk about there's no real I, self, and people think you're crazy. Yeah, but anyway. So here it talks about to recognize that importance of recognize the object of refutation. And that's what Lama Tsongkhapa makes so clear, that that's the most important point. Otherwise, you never will get emptiness. Because if you don't know what has to be refuted or be negated, then you will never understand emptiness, because emptiness is a negation of something. If you don't understand that something, how will you understand emptiness, right? If I say this room is empty of a particular animal you've never seen before, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Although that animal is not in this room, yeah. So like a particular insect somewhere so put a more clear example. You never saw a particular animal somewhere in India, in our garden in Sarah or something like that. If you've never seen that before, and I tell you this room is empty of that animal, then you never seen that animal, so you don't know what I'm talking about it. Although the room is empty still of that animal, right? Or if you have never seen an elephant in your life, and I say Jamyang Center is empty of an elephant, you think, what? The Jamyang Center here is empty of an elephant, right? That's a correct form of statement. But if you've never seen an elephant before, you don't know what I'm talking about. You will never understand the lack or the absence of an elephant. So in a similar way, if you talk about emptiness, right, meaning empty of inherent existence. So if you don't know what inherent existence is, you will never really understand emptiness. You see that? So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa said. The most important point is getting a clear picture. How does this I appear? Yeah, when we get angry, when strong desire arises, when you're close to death, when you get criticized, there's a very from its own side existing I. Yeah, so that's the main job, so to say. If you get that right, then the rest is just a matter of logic. So you need a lot of merits and purification in order to get this clear appearance of the object of refutation. And then the next step is to hold it with your mind, and then from the corner of your mind, you use the reasoning, one and different. If it exists the way it appears, it should be one and different from the mind, right? And then analyze without losing the way it appears. And that's most of us, when we try to meditate on emptiness, it just starts to mix again, or it fades away, the clarity goes, right? So that's a sign of a lack of merit and lack of purification. And it's very important because Lama Tsongkhapa was such an incredible scholar in his 20s. But then Manjushri told him, when he asked Manjushri, do I have the view of Prasangika or Svatantrika? And then Manjushri said, neither. And so that's kind of, to get it really well, you need a little bit more than just intelligence. So it's kind of a need for purification and accumulation of merit, making prayers and etc. etc. So you can get an intellectual understanding. That's of course possible, but to get a realization, that's what we're talking about here. For that purpose, you have to be able to recognize object of refutation very clearly. Yes. So otherwise, you don't know empty of what, empty of this object of refutation, this inherent existing I. And so that's very essential. Yeah. Yeah. So then, verse number 4 before we break. That's over the time. Yeah. Maybe we have a break first. Then. Yeah. What is it? 5 minutes? Is that enough? Just to stretch a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay. 10 minutes. So that means it's 11 o'clock, right? There. Yeah.
10:04. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So what is it?
10 minutes is
15. Yeah. Okay. See you 4:15. Yeah. Yeah.
11:15 for us.
And see how the eye arises. Okay. In the break. Who's drinking coffee? Who's drinking tea? Yeah. Okay. Janjo Samjo Rinpoche Magye Pana Gege Keba Namba Meba Gone Gonda Bawa Tony Tawa Rinpoche Magye Pana Gege Keba Namba Meba Gone Gonda Bawa Show. All right, see you soon. Thank you. Yeah. 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 It takes time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hello again. Yeah. Sorry, we here had a few questions and we are discussing and debating back and forth. This was our break. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Welcome to the second session. Yeah. So do a little bit more because there's a few more verses to be done. Yeah. So we talked about verse number 3, right? We just discussed verse number 3, and verse number 4 goes on that, on this view of the transitory collection. Yeah. Verse number 4 also is an extension of that. Because in verse number 4, it says, when view of I and mine are extinguished, yeah, when whether with respect to the internal or external. So internal means those things that are within the continuity of the person, like the aggregates, for example. Yeah. And external is apart from the aggregates. So all the other phenomena, like computer, table, etc. Yeah. So internal or external, the appropriator, right? So the appropriator ceases. Having ceased, birth ceases. That means that the appropriator, or the thing that causes rebirth, in contaminated rebirth within samsara, that ceases. That's what it says. You know. So that means that if you eliminate the view of the transitory collection, yeah, this innate form of ignorance, then with respect to the internal, the aggregates and all phenomena, so that actually talks about, also it implies the self of the person and the self of phenomena. As you know, in a consequent school or the prasangika school, the root of samsara is both, right? The self of a person as well as the self of phenomena. Because the apprehension of inherent existence is to both. Yeah, we have a grasping at inherent existence of self and of phenomena, self of a person and the self of phenomena. Yeah, so both has to be eliminated. That's very clear in the prasangika, yeah, in the consequent school. So when that ceases, then birth ceases, means contaminated birth stops. Because if you don't have ignorance, as you know, then if you study the 12 links, then you know that remaining links don't come into being if there's no ignorance, one aspect. Yeah. If you have, so you don't create new karma anymore. Yeah. So for example, we say that people who have a direct perception of emptiness, they don't create newly the 12 links because the link of ignorance is not present. If the link of ignorance is not present, then the next link of activity or karmic action, as we call it, is not present. And that there's no activity, negative or positive karma being created. So you are stopping samsara. You don't create new causes for samsara anymore. Causes created in the past, right? If you have direct perception of emptiness, then at the time of dying, we know grasping and craving are the two mental factors that cause the activity of a previous created karma to come to ripening at the time of death. Right? So that means that if you have realized emptiness, then also that stops. Yeah, there's no craving and grasping anymore. Yeah, so that's very clearly set out in Nagarjuna's, chapter 26 of this text. Yeah, it talks about the 12 links. Yeah, it's very clearly set out in that chapter as well as other commentaries on the 12 links. Yeah. So that means then contaminated birth cease or stops. Yeah. Then in verse number 5, it talks about that ceasing of actions and afflictions leads to nirvana. Why? Because the root of samsara is this grasping at inherent existence, right? And the cause, the general direct cause, yeah, so we have to make a distinction here. The root cause is this ignorance, or this innate ignorance. The direct cause is karma and afflictions. Yeah, so the direct cause of suffering is karma and afflictions. Yeah. The root cause is this ignorance of grasping or apprehension of inherent I and mine. Yeah, so here it says that ceasing of action and affliction leads to nirvana because the direct cause of samsara is karma and afflictions. If you realize emptiness, you don't create new karma anymore. I mean, throwing karma in this case, and it's only like your afflictions become less, so negative karma will not be created. So over time, also karma will come to extinct, right? So karma will stop. Yeah. And afflictions also, because if you realize emptiness, then you basically eliminate afflictions together with the seeds. Yeah, if you eliminate afflictions together with the seeds, then there's no cause for samsara anymore. So that happens by realizing emptiness. Yeah. Action and afflictions come from conceptual thoughts, it says. So here, it's not just any conceptual thought, because we have kind of conceptual thoughts that are destructive, and we have conceptual thoughts that are kind of, some are positive, some are negative, right? We use, for example, to realize emptiness is the conceptual process, is conceptual thinking. Yeah. Then ignorance is also a conceptual aspect. Yeah, so we have positive and negative forms of conception, or correct forms of conceptions and misunderstandings. So constructive or destructive. Yeah, so conceptuality in general is not to be abandoned. That's Nagarjuna and Lama Tsongkhapa and great masters, Chandrakirti, Kamalashila made a very big point on that when he came to Tibet to eliminate some misunderstandings on non-thought meditation. So Kamalashila was very clear about that you need conceptual thoughts initially to realize emptiness. As we know, emptiness is a slightly hidden phenomenon, and it can only be realized in a conceptual manner. Yeah, so hidden from direct perception. Emptiness is a reality that is hidden from direct perception. We cannot realize emptiness with our eyes or ears or nose, tongue, or, so we need to use a conceptual aspect. Yeah. So here, what has been eliminated in this second line of verse number 5, it says action and afflictions come from conceptual thoughts, from incorrect forms of conceptual thoughts. Yeah, kind of. Sometimes they talk about the net or the web of conceptual thoughts that is based on seeing everything inherently. So then all our afflictions are rooted in this seeing everything as concrete, independent. Yeah. Yeah. So those kind of thoughts are being eliminated when you realize emptiness, in the process of elimination. Yeah. This comes from the mental factor or mental elaboration. And so that means that this elaboration means a kind of conceptual understanding of the view of the transitory collection. That there is, on top of the body and mind, there is a concrete I and mind. There's a conceptual thought. Yeah, so that's actually causing us problems, because there is no I and mind separate from body and mind, or one with body and mind that exists inherently. Yeah, so these conceptual thoughts did there since the beginning of lifetime. Yeah, so by the power of habituation, we have a thought. That thought stops, but when it stops, it leaves a potential in the mind, right? When you have a disagreement with a person, or you have an argument with a person, when the conversation stops, or you don't see that person in that time, you walk somewhere else, you temporarily forget it. But it's not forgotten forever. The next time a person calls out the name of this person, you say, you get kind of straight away irritated, just by hearing. So that means that we have potentials in our mind planted to react in a particular way when it comes to ripening. Yeah. So the more you habituate to this pattern, the stronger the reaction becomes. Yeah. So the more severe the affliction, the stronger the imprint. The more severe the affliction, the stronger it will come up again and again and again. So that means that this view of the transitory collection is with us since beginner's lifetime. And that's quite long. Yeah, that's kind of no beginning. The continuity of consciousness doesn't have a beginning, as you know, right? So since beginner's lifetime, the view of the transitory collection is causing us this problem. Yeah. So in one way, it's very funny, because since beginner's lifetime, we're troubled by something that doesn't exist. So it's one text by Panchen Lam Lobsang Chögyatsen. It's a very powerful text. debating ignorance. So His Holiness recommends the text a lot. His Holiness said, the view between Svatandrika and Prasangika I got from this text. So that means that this text is quite essential. So this text by the Panchen Lama, Lobsang Chögyal Gyatsen, Debating Ignorance, is very interesting because it's a very nice play between ignorance and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So then ignorance says to emptiness, wisdom realizing emptiness, what? You just new, right? You don't have even the strength. I'm here since the beginning of lifetime. I'm much stronger, you know, and it's very interesting. It helps us to understand. Then ignorance says, you people don't even understand you. So nobody can eliminate me, right? People have very misunderstandings. They never get rid of me because they never prove the opposite of what I am. It's very interesting. So that means that ignorance makes it very clear that in order to remove ignorance, you have to have a mind that is exactly the opposite. Otherwise, you're not capable of removing it. So that brings us to a very important aspect, that emptiness, right? You have to understand well the object of refutation. Otherwise, you don't know how to make exactly the opposite of ignorance. So you have to know how it exists, you have to know how it appears, and then you have to refute it, right? With something that is completely the opposite. Otherwise, you cannot refute it. Yeah. So I never say, Jamyang is empty of an elephant. If you don't know what an elephant is, you don't know what I'm talking about. So that means here, ignorance has to be understood very well in order to be able to refute it. Yeah, you have to have a mind that's exactly the opposite. And that's how our mind functions, right? We have like and dislike. Yeah, you thumbs up or thumbs down. Yeah. Thumbs up is a kind of cola company in India. I don't know if it still exists, but it was a very, I think it still exists actually. It was a very popular one. It's a bit stronger than Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. Quite a distinctive taste. Yeah. It was very popular, and Coca-Cola and Pepsi like to go underneath the price a little bit to take the market in India, and they couldn't get it. because everybody liked thumbs up, so they just bought thumbs up instead. But joking aside, thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So that means we either like or dislike something at a particular time, and that is influenced by our conceptions. Yeah? So that means that if it's thumbs up, if we like a person, at that time the dislike doesn't come to mind, right? When we dislike a person, liking the person doesn't come to mind. Of course, over time we change, depending on the situation, depending on what people say, right? But at one particular moment, we only have one consciousness present. So that means either like or dislike. So that proves when one particular consciousness with regards to a person or regards to a situation is manifest, the opposite will not come into being. You see? If you like a person at one moment of time, that particular moment to dislike this person will not come up. You see that? So that proves that the more you understand emptiness, then ignorance will not capable of to come up to the surface, because it's completely the opposite. So that proves that the more you understand emptiness, ignorance will lose its potential. The more you like a person, the dislike will lose its potential, right? You see that? Yeah. So that means here that if you understand emptiness, then ignorance gets cut. And then if ignorance is cut, there's no action and affliction, and samsara stops over time, right? Not from one day to the other. Yeah. This comes from mental elaboration. Elaboration ceases to emptiness, it says. Because if you understand emptiness well, then you'll be able to eliminate these kind of misunderstandings of realities, these misunderstandings, these conceptualities, yeah, or elaborations. So when you read elaborations in the text, it's from Toa. It's kind of a net or a web of inherent aspects of reality, an apprehension of inherent aspects of reality. So that web actually stops. Yeah, yeah, or program. Yeah, David Bohm calls this a program. It's very similar. You know, it's kind of in our minds, when you believe something, we programmed like that. So, but if you understand ultimate nature of reality, you completely oppose that program, or can completely destroy that program. So that's what it talks about. Yeah. Because if you take away ignorance, then everything related with ignorance starts to lose its potential. Yeah. So all these different states of mind, or this web of the afflictions, or this web of misunderstandings will lose its potential. Yeah. So elaborations, it says, ceases to emptiness, yeah, to realizing emptiness. Yeah. Then in verse number 6, it says that there is self has been taught. Okay. So here in verse number 6, it talks about the Buddhas being extremely extremely skillful. Sometimes the Buddha said there is a self, and sometimes the Buddha said there's no self. Because if the Buddha, in certain occasion, taught there's no self, people will lose, people will lose kind of interest in cause and effect. If there's a danger to falling into the extreme of nihilism, then the Buddha didn't teach the most subtle view of selflessness. So that's why it says here. There's one interpretation of verse number 6, that there is a self has been taught. Yeah, or you can say the Buddha in the 4 schools of Buddhist philosophy taught to, for example, the Vaibhasika and Chandrakirti. There is no self that exists permanent, unitary, and autonomous, but everything exists substantially. Everything exists inherently. That's what the Buddha taught to those schools of thought, of the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School. Right. So it Buddha very skillfully gives them first a very coarse understanding, but then slowly over time can lead them. If they straight away teaches the most subtle view, they will completely misunderstand it. So the same for us, when you study physics, you have to study in stages, otherwise you don't know what the later physicists refute from the previous one. So there's a lot of debate between, as you know, the different kind of forms of Newtonism, then Einstein and Niels Bohr came, and then David Bohm and Carlo Rovelli. You can see there's a very interesting sequence that Newtonism, is very similar to the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School, right? Where you come into the uncertainty principle, the Copenhagen interpretation of the uncertainty principle is very close to mind-only school, right? But now if you talk with Carlo Rovelli or read his books, especially the last one, Helgoland, it's very close to consequence, Prasangika school. So you see there also, there's a development. Yeah? So in that way, you can see that even physics and correlation with our view of reality in the views of tenets, there's a lot of similarities. It's very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so the Buddha sometimes thought there was a self in order for people not to fall into the extreme of nihilism. Yeah. So the doctrine of no self, by the Buddha as well. So the Buddha taught about self and not self, because initially the Buddha said there is no permanent, unitary, autonomous self, but the person exists inherently. That's what the Buddha taught initially, right? Then later on, he gets more and more subtle, and then all the way up in the consequent school, then the Buddha said there is no permanent, unitary, and independent self, but also there's no inherent self. And so that means in different levels, no permanent, unitary, independent. Then a little bit subtle, no self-sufficient, substantial self. Then a little bit more subtle. There's no self that exists truly. Then it goes a step further. There's no self that exists inherently. So according to the schools of philosophy, the Buddha became more and more subtle. And as for us, it's quite important to follow that sequence, because how does I appear and what does actually exist? We have to go in stages, to understand that. Yeah. So that's very skillful of the Buddha. Because if you, for example, say, okay, the I doesn't exist the way it appears, but what is the self? What is the person? What is the conventional reality? What does exist? Yeah. So if you go, for example, to the autonomous school, one of the schools of the middle way, the autonomous school says there is no true existing self. There is no truly established person. There is no true I. There is no true body. There is no true mind. But if I look for something, I should be able to find something. Otherwise, nothing exists at all. So what is the person? If you ask the autonomous school of the middle way, they will say the mental consciousness, that is the illustration of the person, that goes from this life to the next life. That mental consciousness is the person. So that, it makes sense, right? Yeah, there's no thing separate from body and mind. That is the person. If you check, there's nothing separate from body and mind. That is a person, right? But there is something there. Yeah, and then the autonomous school says this mental consciousness that goes from this life to the next life, that kind of what we call, that's a person that exists. And you can find it if you look for it. So that's kind of an autonomous school. It makes sense in one way. If you debate this school, it's very interesting. It's very convincing to a certain extent. Then you go to the school of the consequent school. Prasangika goes a step further. They said, yes, it's true, nothing exists truly, but even this mental consciousness, is that the self or not, is a question. Because if you look into consciousness, where is this self? Because consciousness is just moments of continuity. So the moment you pinpoint down one moment, that's already gone. You're already in the next moment. So in the different moments of consciousness, you cannot really say, I'm here, I'm there. You cannot find it. And so then Prasangika said, it's just merely imputed based upon the mere collection. Right? So it's very interesting. I always use the example of the river, but it's quite helpful. If you have snow that is melting from a mountain, and there's a nice little, not the heavy rain we see in Europe these days, but a nice kind of stream, right? And it goes into a lake. So if you sit in front of that stream, then the moment the snow melts, comes into the stream and then goes into the lake. What is actually this river? What is that? It's just basically merely imputed upon time and space, meaning at one particular location, at one particular time, I say this is the river. But if I wait an hour later, all those water molecules are already in the lake and are not a river anymore. Yeah, so that's process. The process of the river is just merely imputed. We cannot find the river among the water molecules. Because in the edge, when it becomes the lake, it's just every split second, it goes in there, right? So every water molecule that goes in there is not a river anymore. So what we call a river is just, depending on time and space, we say, okay, this is the river. So our continuity of consciousness is very similar. The moment we started until the present, 1 hour, what is it? Almost 40 minutes gone. That means that that's past. That continuity of consciousness past. So, well, if that was the self, then that self is not present anymore. You see? So, and the future, it doesn't exist yet. So where is the self? You actually cannot find it in the stream of consciousness. You see that? Yeah? So it's kind of, that's why Prasangika then comes to the conclusion, even if you look for that consciousness, you can't really find it. It's just merely imputed, depending on time and space. Yeah, so it's very interesting. This is the most subtle form of conventional reality, merely imputed by the mind, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so also in quantum mechanics, basically people start to think in similar ways. Yeah. Yeah. So then the Buddha very skillfully teaches in different levels of development according to the intelligence of the people and their imprints, etc., etc. So, yeah, sorry. Okay. Then in verse number, yeah, okay. So if you want to know a little bit more about this text, then verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 talks about the first 3 of the Four Noble Truths. It talks about true suffering, the true origin of suffering, and true cessation. Yeah, it talks about nirvana, it talks about the cause of suffering, and it talks about suffering. The cause of suffering, karma and afflictions, being the direct cause, and the root cause being this view of the transcendental collection. And so until including verse number 6, talks about the first 3 truths of the Four Noble Truths. Then verse number 7 and below, it talks about the true paths. because it talks about a direct perception of emptiness. That's what it talks about. So there it talks about in number 7, what language expresses is non-existent. So the apprehension of the mind is non-existent. So here, basically there's different interpretations also here of this verse, but it comes down that it is inexpressible. A direct perception of emptiness is you cannot express it. It's a very hidden phenomena, emptiness. Sorry, slightly hidden phenomena, emptiness, as you know. So you have to understand it initially by the power of conceptual understanding. And emptiness is what is called a non-affirming negative. Yeah, so it means an absence of something. And this absence of something is not that easy to be understood because we don't know what is absence of what. Yeah, so that's why it says it's inexpressible. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, and certain commentaries they say because it's a non-affirming negative because nothing comes instead. You know, it's not that first there's this ignorance, or first is this inherent existence that exists, and then it doesn't become non-existent. It's not like that. It never existed before. So it means that inherent I never existed before. Right? It's not that it disappears, but we start to see it never existed like that. We see the absence of it. Yeah, and to have the absence of something like emptiness, being the absence of inherent existence, that by itself is quite a complex thing. So many people, when you talk about non-affirming negative, people they lose it. Because it's kind of, non-affirming negative means it's a negative of non-inherent existence, right? But there's nothing that comes instead of it. For example, if you have the example of the fat person likes eating, but doesn't eat during the day. So what does it imply? It eats at night, right? Yeah, so that means that that's something implied. But when you say no inherent existence, nothing comes instead of that. And so that's why we call it a non-affirming negative. The fat person who likes eating and doesn't eat during the day is an affirming negative. It affirms something. You know, it implies it eats at night. But emptiness is a non-affirming negative. It doesn't imply anything else. So when you try to meditate on emptiness and then you see how the object appears, object refutation, then you refute it, it's not one different from body and mind, and then the absence of inherent existence should appear. At that time, if you think, oh, now I'm meditating on emptiness, then you're already lost. Yeah, because it's not a non-affirming negative anymore. Right? You're already affirming things. Oh, yeah, that's true, because my body is momentary changing, this, that, and if you think like that, is affirming things, right? And so the meditation on emptiness only becomes an antidote towards ignorance when it's exactly the opposite, as we just discussed. Yeah, so when does it become exactly the opposite? When you see how the I appears, you see it's not one, not different from body and mind, it's not there. At that time, lack. And at that time, a little bit of fear can arise of, it's not there. Only that absence appears to the mind and you stay in that. And that's the power of because then only staying there, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche sometimes says, right there. It's a very, very important statement because that means right there means you see this I appearing before, you see it's not one and different from body and mind, it's not there. And you say right there, meaning only you focus upon the absence of it, nothing else. You don't think about anything else. You just keep your mind at that state. That's the only mind that opposes ignorance, nothing else. Because that's exactly the opposite. Because we grasp at the inherent I, and now we see no inherent I. Right? So that's the only way you can eliminate ignorance with this non-affirming negative. It means that's why they say like space, you know, like the sky. Not like space like blue sky, but like absence of things. Vast absence. That's what it's called space-like. And so a direct perception of emptiness is like that. When His Holiness taught last, because Jürgen Duchin, you know, the real turning day, as you know, His Holiness gave a commentary to people in Ladakh. And then His Holiness talked in the second day about its experience of emptiness. And when he checked with Yonzin Lingrimship, you know, that Johnson Rinpoche at that time said, give actually the prediction that you will able to get a space-like appearance, or the space-like meditation, to be more correct. That means that with a direct perception of emptiness, it's like space-like, because only emptiness appears, nothing else. Yeah? So that is the only direct antidote towards ignorance. So that's the direct perception of emptiness. Yeah. So that says here, and then and that's not easy to be understood. You know, if I explain to you blue cheese in Limburg is one of our provinces in the Netherlands. They have this very stinky smelling blue cheese. Yeah. So how that exactly tastes is very difficult to explain. So I tell you, it's not Gouda cheese. It's not a Dutch cheese. And I tell you, it's not mozzarella, and it's not camembert or something like that. So you get closer, right, what it actually is. But you don't really understand until you really taste it yourself. Yeah, so with emptiness, it's probably very similar. We try to reason it and put logic to it, but the real understanding only comes when you directly perceive it. Yeah, so that's why it says here it's inexpressible. But it doesn't mean we should leave it with that. We should examine it every day. That's what His Holiness, His Holiness says. His Holiness either teaches emptiness, or he dreams about it, or reads about it. So it seems to be quite a statement that even at His Holiness present time, he said every day he looks in Chandrakirti's works, Nagarjuna works. So that's kind of a message, right? That we should follow a similar kind of approach. Yeah. So inexpressed by language, because it's, because of being unarisen, unceased, like nirvana. So here it says, nirvana is also an absence of something, right? Nirvana is an absence of afflictions and their seeds. Yeah. So emptiness is very similar, because emptiness is absence of inherent existence. Yeah. So nirvana is absence of afflictions and seeds. Emptiness is empty of inherent existence, or an absence of inherent existence. Yeah. So in the nature of things, verse number 7. Then verse number 8, it says, is also quite, you can make it very complex if you want to, but we keep it simple. Yeah. Verse number 8. Verse 8 in the Tsongkhapa, in the Chandrakirti's clear words. I don't know if it's ever been translated, but Chandrakirti has one commentary on this particular text. Chandrakirti has two commentaries on this text, right? The supplement to the Middle Way, which is now Thupten Jinpa's excellent translation of Illuminating the Thought. Yeah, so that's kind of a new book by wisdom of Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti's supplement to the Middle Way. It's a very, very good commentary. One of the best inspiring texts, I think, on the Middle Way school in this tradition. So the other text by Chandrakirti is the clear words. So then he gave a clear word-by-word explanation of this text. Yeah? And Lama Tsongkhapa's text, Ocean of Reasoning, is very similar. It's very similar to Chandrakirti's work of clear words. So Chandrakirti says here, talks about verse 8 is a little bit the illusory appearances, meaning verse number 7 talks about this sky or space-like absence of inherent existence that appear. Well, verse 8 talks about when you come out of that meditation, how do things appear to the mind? And so then it talks about things appear like an illusion. Things appear inherently, but you see or you understand by the power of your realization, you understand it's not like that. It doesn't appear the way it exists. So Lama Tsongkhapa very clear in the Lamrim Chamor, for example, in the section, in the end of the section of explaining the sevenfold reasoning in that text. Lama Tsongkhapa very interesting talks about just 2-3 paragraphs on what is an illusory appearance. So then Lama Tsongkhapa said very clearly, illusory appearance comes by the power of the meditation on emptiness. When you get out of the because in meditation on emptiness, you see there is no inherent existence. And the lack of inherent existence appears. You come out of that and then you see everything appears very inherently, but actually it's not really there the way it appears. So that's what we call illusory appearances. So that's in verse number 8. Everything is real and not real, it says. That means that everything is real in the sense that through the power of ignorance, it looks as real. To the power of world conventions, things appear as real out there, inherent, right? And it's not real when you examine it. And especially with the power of direct perception of emptiness, you see it doesn't exist the way it appears. Real and not real. Yeah. So yeah, then again, both real and not real, yeah, that talks about the second line. So that's the first line. The first line is that the power of ignorance, it looks real, but by the power of realization of emptiness, it looks not real. Then the next line, both real and not real, refers to the conventional truth. Like if I look at the screen, I see you all very clearly. But when I do like this, I put my finger, I press my eyeball like that, I see two screens and two people everywhere. So that seeing two is that seeing two, that is not real in conventional level. Yeah? So the second line, real and not real, for conventional realities. Neither real nor not real. Yeah, so that talks about aspects of yeah, also the two types of conventional realities. Yeah, and then this the Lord Buddha taught accordingly, neither nihilism nor eternalism. So that means that three of the two extremes. Yeah, that there is no inherent existence, but on a conventional level, things exist. That's what it says. You know? They're not dependent upon another. So here still talks about Arya beings, right? Not dependent on other, peaceful and not elaborated by elaborations, not thought without this distinction. So here it talks about a direct perception of emptiness, which is free of thought and free of conceptual elaborations. And, you know, meaning that it's a peaceful state, because if you directly realize emptiness, yeah, then you abide in this kind of the main antidote, which will establish nirvana, right? Eventually. Yeah. These are the characteristics of deadness, and then another aspect of non-thought without distinction, meaning whatever object you can think of, it's empty of inherent existence. Yeah, there's no difference between the emptiness of Tenzin Namdak and the emptiness of yourself. The emptiness of yourself, the emptiness of your mind, and the emptiness of the mind of the Buddha, exactly the same. The nature of emptiness is the same. Yeah, this means that there's without distinctions, it says in this third line, with this verse number 9, meaning there's no differentiation between the emptiness of the table, the emptiness of my body, the emptiness of my mind, and the emptiness of the Buddha. The nature of emptiness is the same, empty of inherent existence. Yeah. Whatever comes into being, dependent upon another, is not identical to that thing, nor different from it. So that here talks again about the first line in verse number 10, it talks about interdependence, everything is interdependence, and because everything is dependent upon other than itself, that's why there is no inherent existence. Nothing can exist from its own side, because our body and mind are interconnected. We put food inside, get digested, our lungs are working, our heart is working, our mind is thinking about things, perceiving objects. There's a constant flux of coming and going, right? So in this process of coming and going, there is no I to be found. So if you do a lot of foreclosed placements of mindfulness meditations of the body, you know, feeling and mind, for example, the first three, you do that well again and again, then you see there is no place for a concrete I in this process. So you can see in that way that actually there is no I to be found. Yeah, and then in the second line, it says identical to that thing or different. So it talks about the reasons we talked about already, that one and different. So yeah, the I is not one with and not different from the body and mind. And the I appears, I cannot see it one with the body, because the body has many parts and the I appears to be only one. Same with the mind, there's many aspects of the mind, it appears to be one. And it's not different from the body and the mind, like a cat and a dog, completely different. So that's, you cannot find it. Yeah, it's very interesting. You just look, where is the I? You cannot really find it in the body and the mind, right? Okay. So yeah. This is the teaching, this is nectar of the teaching in verse number 11, a talk the teaching on dependent origination. Because by the power of dependent origination, we see that nothing exists from its own side. And the power of dependent origination, we see there is no concrete inherent I to be found. Yeah. Of the Buddha's patterns of the worlds, I understood as without identity or with distinction. So here, without identity and distinction, identity talks one with, distinction talks about different from. The same reason, one with, different from. Neither nihilism or eternalism. Yeah, so here, it's very interesting. It talks about two main reasons. If you see the last section of Lama Tsongkhapa's Mālamadhyamaka, when he summarizes things, he says the main two things to depend upon is the reason one and different, as we discussed, and the reason interdependence or dependent origination. And then he says that if you contemplate one and different reasoning, that prevents you from falling into the extreme of eternalism, because you cannot find an I, one with or different from the body and mind. So you see there is no concrete I. If you understand dependent origination, you see on a conventional level there is something there, which is merely imputed. Yeah, so that means dependent origination prevents us from falling into this extreme of nihilism. Yeah, so the one and different reason helps us not to grasp to the extreme of eternalism, yeah, that everything exists inherently. Yeah, we refute that. And with dependent origination, we see on a conventional level, there is something. Yeah. That's on verse number 11. Then 12, when the fully enlightened ones do not appear, and when the hearers have disappeared, the wisdom of the self-enlightenment, means the solitary realizes, will arise completely without dependence. Yeah, so means without an inherent dependence is one interpretation. Another interpretation without dependence on the teacher, because as you know, a solitary realizer achieves the last goal of liberation at a time there's no teacher or there's no Buddha all by themselves to inspire people. Yeah. Yeah. By the power of previous habituations, so to say. Yeah. Yeah, so that means also there is no liberation without realizing emptiness. And this verse 12 also implies that, according to the Consequent school, all beings who like to achieve liberation have to realize emptiness of inherent existence, including the hearers and the solitary realizers. So that's very interesting because in the Consequent school, they have the 8 points or 8 uncommon points of the Consequent school. Once I did something in Nalanda for these 8 points. It's very interesting because you see how the Consequent school actually put forward why is grasping at inherent existence the root of samsara. It's very, very interesting. So why do everybody wants to get liberated? Why does everybody needs to realize emptiness of inherent existence? And then it proves that by the power of all afflictions are rooted in apprehension of inherent existence. The most subtle form of affliction you can put forward, according to the Prasangika school. Because you see, every form of anger, every form of attachment, desire is fundamentally rooted in this apprehension of an I that exists inherently. So if you don't eliminate that, you will never be able to eliminate afflictions. So if you study the 8 uncommon points of Prasangika, you get a very clear understanding of their view and why they put it forward. So it's quite interesting. I was thinking for auspiciousness is read from Tibetan. If you can just listen or on transmission can take. See from His Holiness. Yeah. From chapter 18. Gyalde Bumbo Diana, Gedan Jigwa Jinda Yu, Gyalde Bumbo Namla Shen, Bumbo Zen, Meva Yu, Dani Yeva Mayena, Dagi Yeva Kalar, Dadan Dagi Shiva Ju, Shiva Je, Ranjing Hazin, Razing Hazin, Zime Yu, Ranjing Hazin, Meva Kang, De Yeva Mayen, Hazin Hazin, Meva Hazin, Hazin Nayi, Zimeba, Kangi Tungwa, Mitongo. Nang dang chiro nidala nadang chiro nidala dadang dagi nyamse na nyewa nyewa kakyo ching dese dese pana kiwa se leda nyumon zebata leda nyumon namtak les de la jole jowani tonani kawa gyur dago she gyang dagyo shin dagyang dagme che yang Temba gyur sangyen namgi dagdan ni dagmi gyame che gyang ten zoba jawa dogba de sangi che yu dogba so magye padang maga pa cheni nale de tangzu tamje yangda min yangda mayeni yangda mimi yangda min de ni sangye je tenpa ho chen la shemen shiwa tang zoba namgi ma zhe namda midun Dade min deni deni zeni do galaten de kanjung wa deni rishi deni min de le shen wa amayin mayin chir de chi chimin da mayin sangye chi den honam gi tenba dun ji gyurwat dun ji mayin tate min cheba mayin da mayin zoba sangye nama jungjin net nam kyang se pa ma rang rang ki ye shen ni ten pa me le rab zhu de da dang che da xie jia wa de na rab xie ji chob ge ba o sa Yageru Prajna Na Mana Karika Man Karika Burgedu Uma Tava Shigeli Chiragisa Kunjo Sumna Chaza Baba Chamba Shunikula Jazara Oban Baba Yuna Jaza Gangi Denjin Duajun Kaba Meva Kimeba Chiba Meva Tameva Hua Meva Joe Ma Dada Dumen Dunjin Min Joe Joe Neva Jidemba Zoba Sangi Manamgi Damba Dela Chaselo. Yeah. Okay, yeah, it's a bit short presentation of the chapter 18, but yeah, we don't have that much time. So yeah, so I hope there's some benefits in a few points we talked about. If there's any questions still, we can have a few minutes if people have questions. Otherwise, yeah.
Geshe,
Hi.
please, would you clarify the difference between conceptions and elaborations, or conceptions and fabrications? Yeah, thank you.
So a conception can be just one particular state of mind, right? For example, a conception of an apprehension of the screen. Yeah, you look at the screen, you close your eyes, there's an apprehension of the mental image of the screen, yeah, which is kind of a conception. Yeah, but elaborations talks about elaborations by seeing everything in the nature of inherent existence. Yeah, so there's a more kind of bigger picture, or sometimes we say elaborations or these nets or these webs based upon having a conceptual kind of apprehension of inherent existence. Because of that, you see everything in its same nature. So that becomes this elaboration of seeing this because of the power of this habituation since beginning of lifetime. We see this kind of elaborations of everything in that same aspect of inherent existence. Well, a mere conception of the screen is just one mind, and the meaning generality, so to say, or the mental image is just the screen. Yeah, we don't really talk about elaborations. But whatever conceptual consciousness comes to mind is also in the nature of elaboration, because all meaning generalities, they appear inherently. Yeah, so then you talk about conceptual elaborations, because even when you realize emptiness with a conceptual mind, the meaning generality of emptiness appears inherently. Yeah, so that proves that you need a direct perception of emptiness to eliminate ignorance, because a direct perception of emptiness is free of all elaborations, meaning a direct perception of emptiness doesn't need a mental image. Yeah, you know, direct perception doesn't depend on mental images. It's the eye consciousness perceiving the screen happens without the interference of a mental image. Yeah? Well, when you close your eyes and you think about the screen, the only way to think about it is by generating this mental image. Yeah? So a direct perception of emptiness is free of every elaboration. From the point of view, it's free of conceptuality in general. So that means if it's free of conceptuality in general, one aspect. Another aspect is inherent existence doesn't appear to a directly perceiving mind, to a mind directly perceiving emptiness. Yeah, so that's why we say free of elaborations in the context of direct perception. Yeah. Does this help, Peter? Or yeah.
Yeah, excuse me, Geshe. So in order to realize directly emptiness, then you need Shine.
Yeah,
Yes,
correct.
Shine and you know, Lactong, because you know, when you still have all the conceptions, so you have to go through reasoning, like you said, but at one point the reasoning ceases, has to cease, otherwise they cannot, there is only a mental image that remains, right?
Yeah, correct. So if you study, for example,
please go ahead.
Yeah. So if you study, for example, grounds and paths, then you enter, if you have bodhicitta, direct, you know, realization of bodhicitta, you enter the paths, right? So then if you haven't realized emptiness yet, conceptually, you will realize it on the first part of accumulation, as we call it, right? Yeah. So then if you're on the part of accumulation, the next part is the part of preparation, meaning preparing for a direct perception of emptiness. Yeah, it's still conceptual. So at that time already, you need Shine, you need calm abiding. Why? Because on the part of preparation, it's a mind that is the union of calm abiding, special insight, realizing emptiness, still in conceptual manner. Yeah. So at that time, reasoning is needed less than before because it's already realized. It's just you habituate yourself to the realization of emptiness. At the time of the part of preparation, the minds realizing emptiness and emptiness itself appear in a dualistic manner because of the meaning generality and the conceptual realization. But because of the power of the non-duality of calm abiding special insight, the mind becomes a little bit more subtle, right? And the duality between minds and object becomes less. So by the power of habituation of that realization, eventually that duality disappears. And then it transforms in what we call this direct perception of emptiness on the part of seeing. So you can see already on the part of accumulation, you need already Shine, right? You need already calm abiding. And then it becomes the union of calm abiding special insight on the part of preparation that prepares for direct perception of emptiness. And in the 4 levels on that part, it becomes the dualistic appearance becomes less and less and less. And then you see emptiness without depending on a mental image. And then that becomes what Peter Ketch is referring to, you know, this kind of free of elaborations at the time of direct perception. Yeah. But initially you need conceptual realization, right? Yeah, because it's kind of a slightly hidden phenomenon. But that realization, the conceptual one, becomes much and much more profound. And then the dualistic appearance disappears. And then you see emptiness directly on the part of seeing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good questions. Yeah. Well, our senior students, right? Peter and Massimo. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Good to see you again. It's been quite some years. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Any other question? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted your advice on something you said in the beginning about, you know, as you begin to understand emptiness better, you develop more faith in the law of cause and effect, and it helps you sort of abide in morality. And, you know, logically, all of that makes perfect sense. But then I feel like in my experience, I can't let go of the idea of a self because I feel like who will make the right choices? Like, you know, I won't show up for the teaching. I'll just go and hang out with my friends. Like, I don't feel I can trust the process of cause and effect. to do the right thing.
Yeah, sorry, your voice is breaking up a little bit, but if I got it correctly, it's kind of, you can see that there's a correlation between emptiness, if you understand it well, and seeing cause and effect, but still on a day-to-day basis, you still have this apprehension of the self, right? Is it?
That I don't trust that that if I just leave it to cause and effect, that I will make good choices. Like,
Yeah, you make the choices. Yeah, I mean, then you come to a whole discussion that we called, is free will possible and what is it? Yeah, which is kind of not an easy discussion, but it's very interesting. Because there is no self, right? There's no inherent self. There's only law of cause and effect. And also in our continuity of consciousness, there is a cause and effect relationship. That means what is free will, or what makes a decision, is basically based on previous incarnations. So that if you think about this well, then the precious human rebirth starts to make even more sense than we thought about it before. Because to think about the things we think about now, to have a connection with the Dharma as we have now, is very, very rare. And that means there is nothing else than the continuity of our consciousness that brings us here, right? So that proves that in the previous states of existence, we have an habituation to this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have met today and discussed this. It's very precious, you know. So that means that the more you habituate your mind to that pattern, it will repeat itself in the future. And that's very scientific. Karma is very scientific. If you think about karma, in scientific terms, we talk about probabilities, right? So nothing is spooky. In the time of Einstein and sometimes the two-slit experiment, people think it's spooky. But if you take interpretations of David Bohm or Carlo Rovelli, nothing is spooky. Everything can be explained. And why can things be explained? Because we live in a world of probabilities. Things come into being by the power of potentialities, potentials. And that's very scientific. And that's karma is exactly the same. You know? That means that in our continuity, since beginner's lifetime, we have all kinds of habituation patterns, which repeat itself, and which causes us to think in a particular way, which causes us to move in a particular way. There's no self separate from that. So that means the more we habituate our mind to these things we're discussing now, and the spiritual part, it will produce this, what we always call the seeds. The more seeds are planted, you know, you go forward, right? That's what we say. The more seeds are planted, the more the harvest will bring. Yeah, and that's true. That's what it is, right? That's what this law of cause and effect is all about. And it's, what I said before, it's very scientific. You know, and I had a dialogue with Robert Shreddrack, who is kind of quite a controversial person in biology and in science in general. It's a very interesting person to talk to. Then when we had because I don't really completely agree with this morphic resonance hypothesis, but when we're discussing things, and he asked a few questions about the Buddhist thought, and we talked about these kind of probabilities. He said that is very scientific, and it's true, right? It's very scientific, because what happens in our continuity of consciousness, and what happens if we get sick or whatsoever, is by the power of having karmically causes, and that means external conditions, like with the pandemic, etc., etc. So that means we have in our continuity of consciousness, we have all these probabilities. This can happen if you meet that condition. That can happen if you meet that condition. So that's the free will in that context, means that the more you habituate your mind to these positive patterns, you will move in a positive direction, right? So that's the free will. And exactly what I said in that interview with Van Roche, that Lama Zopa said, what is relaxation and abiding in morality? It's a very profound statement, because if you abide in morality, you automatically create the right causes for the future. You don't have to worry. Right? That's actually real relaxation. That's what it is. You don't have to worry. And that's also what His Holiness often says. If you think about emptiness and interdependence, it gives you so much peace. Why? Because you live exactly according to this law of reality we cannot change, but we can live according to that law, right? And that's very interesting. So that means that free will is not much more than this. It's a very interesting scientific research done by Jeffrey Schwartz and Henry Stepp. Very interesting. What is free will? Bringing quantum mechanics into brain activity, talking about probabilities within the release of neurotransmitters, and then what comes out. It's very interesting. And I like it a lot because it's a very Buddhist explanation. I talked to one of my friends here in London. She's a neuroscientist. She said there's many interpretations of it, and you can refute it, but also I like it a lot because she's also Buddhist. So she said it fits perfectly, but it makes sense, right? It makes a lot of sense that our continuity of consciousness is this. And that's why what proves that you meet a Dharma for the first time and there's a connection, or you meet a spirituality and another spirituality, and there's a connection, which has never been met in this life. And your life changes like that. What is that? That means that there is something of previous habituation patterns that is being activated, and by that activation, it comes to ripening. That's what we say, right? And that's what it is. We have all these probabilities in our mind, and that meets a condition, and it comes to ripening. So that's basically, and there's no inherent self being the controller or deciding this or that. You see, so that means that emptiness makes a lot of sense in understanding law of cause and effect, and then you don't have to worry anymore because the same with fire is hot and burning, you cannot change the nature of fire being hot and burning, but you can play with it and preventing yourself from getting harmed, not putting your hand into the fire. So in a similar way, the law of cause and effect we cannot change. We cannot change that anger produces suffering. We cannot change that reality, but we can prevent ourselves from getting angry. So that means that this law of probabilities in that way, if you live in accordance to that, then there's a free will because there's a direction, because you want happiness and don't want suffering. So that's if you abide in morality, as Rinpoche says, or you live in accordance to law of cause and effect, then you accomplish that happiness, right? And you eliminate suffering. So that's kind of the free will we like to accomplish, isn't it? So that's, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. The more I think about it, and even karma is not something magical. It's very scientific. Yeah. I mean, you can explain it very scientifically that way. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Geshe.
Okay. Thank you so much then. Yeah. Thank you so much. And then see you in September or something, right? Or what is it?
September.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And then, yeah, don't die. Then we meet again in September, okay? Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So then, before we die, and we have to always dedicate. So that's why we do now also some dedications. Yeah. So maybe dedicate for particular purposes, and also think that yourself making the dedication, and the aim we dedicate towards too, and the dedication itself is empty of infinite existence, right? That means we say sealing with emptiness, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche often indicates. Yeah, but the meaning is that you see things are in the nature of cause and effect relationships, and that's why it's going to happen. So that means if you think with that form of faith and you make a prayer or dedication, the results will be much stronger in the sense of not seeing it as inherent, seeing it as it is, right? Yeah. So try to think that with the dedication also. It's empty of inherent existence, and then we do a few dedications. And we screen share of that. Yeah. Of the dedications of to spreading of Buddha Dharma, and in particular, long and healthy life, precious gurus, His Holiness Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and all the holy wishes contained fulfilled, two bodhicittas to be realized, and then also kasa, obstacles to be eliminated, etc. Never parted from the precious gurus in future lifetimes. Yeah. Do we have the screen share or?
I'm having trouble getting my screen share. What is this? Okay.
Oh.
There you go.
Yeah, there it comes. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay. Yeah, mandala no needs. Yeah, go a bit down, a bit down. One page. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So first, spreading of Buddha teachings. Yeah. Dagi jine sabe gewa di tendan doa. Eva jason lozan daba yi imbe ringo selje jo kare rawe korwe zinga. Pendan dewa malu jongwe jere zigwan tenzin gyalzoi. Jabe jite badu tengu tuzan zam shin jahan yun yao en zing yong pao gyun zhen do bo zi jo sun do re le nun zun ta so ji yong de jab de jo jan jo san jo go ma ye pa na ye yu chi Keba nyamba meba yang gone gonde bewa toni tawa ringoje magye pana ngeje Keba nyamba meba yang gone gonde bewa show. As long as space remains and as long as sentient beings remain on spell, may to remain the spell of suffering and great beings. May the King of Dharma, Tsongkhapa's way of Dharma practice flourish, and may the omens and obscure pacify, and all conditions be complete. To the power of having made single-point request to you, Lord Chandrakirti, may all unfortunate manifestations of generate age, illness, famine, falling, epidemic disease, and current spirits, and all excellent collection of condition increase. Please bless me that all my wishes be fulfilled. By evoking the power of loving kindness and compassion of Jamyang into the force of making extensive prayers, may all sickness, war, fighting, famine be completely pacified, so that all beings have long, healthy, happy lives. May the Guru's life be long and stable, and may all beings according to the state of happiness. And may I and others without exception make purifying activities, and may be blessed with the Buddhahood. In all my lives, never separate from perfect Gurus, may enjoy the beneficent Dharma, by complete and qualitative stages and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. Okay, thank you so much. Ciao. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful
Bye.
teaching.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la. That was awesome. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.